In the depths of the Alaskan wilderness, one man's act of compassion would forever alter his destiny. When retired wildlife photographer Michael Harrison rescued a dying bear cub from certain death, he never imagined that 5 years later, their paths would cross again in a way that would challenge everything we know about wild animals and human connection. The crisp autumn air bit through Michael Harrison's weathered jacket as he trudged through the charred remains of what was once a thriving forest. 3 days had passed since the devastating wildfire had torn through this section of the Alaskan wilderness, leaving behind a haunting landscape of blackened trees and ash-covered ground. Through his camera lens, he documented nature's resilience, the first green shoots already pushing through the scorched earth. At 62, Michael had spent decades capturing the raw beauty of Alaska's wildlife. Though officially retired from National Geographic, he couldn't resist returning to these remote locations, especially after natural disasters. These moments of renewal, he believed, told the most compelling stories. The weak afternoon sun filtered through the smoke-hazed sky, casting an otherworldly glow across the devastated terrain. Michael paused to adjust his camera settings when a faint sound caught his attention, a whimper so soft he almost dismissed it as wind through the hollow trees. But 20 years of wildlife photography had taught him to trust his instincts. Following the sound, he carefully navigated around fallen logs and still smoldering stumps. The whimpering grew clearer, taking on a distinctive pitch that made his heart race. He'd heard similar sounds before, the distress call of a bear cub. Rounding a massive charred spruce, Michael froze. There, curled against the base of the tree, lay a small black bear cub. Its fur was singed, its tiny body trembling with each labored breath. The cub's eyes, barely open, held a desperation that struck Michael to his core. Years of experience screamed at him to keep his distance. Every wildlife photographer knew the cardinal rule: never interfere with nature's course. Moreover, where there was a cub, a protective mother couldn't be far behind. Yet something felt different. The cub's isolation, the absence of any adult tracks in the ash, and its severely weakened state told a grim story. "Where's your mama, little one?" Michael whispered, scanning the desolate landscape. He knew bears often fled from forest fires, sometimes leaving behind cubs that couldn't keep pace. The chances of reunion after such chaos were slim, and without intervention, this cub's fate was sealed. Time seemed to stand still as Michael wrestled with his conscience. The professional in him said to document and move on, let nature take its course. But the human in him, the part that had spent a lifetime observing these magnificent creatures, couldn't walk away. With trembling hands, Michael set down his camera equipment and pulled out his satellite phone. He had a friend, Dr. Sarah Chen, who ran a wildlife rehabilitation center about 50 miles south. If anyone could help, it would be her. The cub stirred as Michael's voice broke the eerie silence, his call to Sarah echoing in the burned-out forest. Her response was immediate and clear. If the cub was truly abandoned, every minute counted. She would dispatch their rescue team, but with the fire-damaged roads, it would take hours to reach this remote location. Looking at the dying cub, Michael knew it didn't have hours. The temperature was dropping with the sun, and in its weakened state, the young bear wouldn't survive the frigid Alaskan night. Against every protocol and years of professional wisdom, he made a decision that would alter both their lives forever. "Hang on, little one," he murmured, shrugging off his thick jacket. "Help is coming, but first, we need to get you warm." The fading daylight cast long shadows through the skeletal remains of the forest as Michael carefully approached the bear cub. His heart pounded against his ribs, years of wildlife experience screaming at him to reconsider. But the tiny creature's labored breathing left no room for hesitation. With gentle movements, Michael spread his thick expedition jacket on the ground beside the cub. The young bear was smaller than he'd initially thought, probably no more than 2 months old. Its singed fur revealed patches of raw skin underneath, telling the harrowing story of its escape from the wildfire. "Easy now," Michael whispered, his voice barely audible above the whisper of wind through the charred trees. The cub's eyes, glazed with exhaustion, tracked his movements. There was no fear in those eyes, only a desperate plea for help that transcended species. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Now back to the story. Using his backpack as a makeshift barrier between his hands and the cub's body, Michael gently scooped up the trembling creature. The lack of resistance confirmed his worst fears. The cub was far too weak to fight back. It weighed hardly anything, its tiny frame ravaged by dehydration and hunger. As he wrapped the jacket around the cub, creating a secure cocoon, Michael's satellite phone crackled to life. Sarah's voice cut through the static. "Michael, the rescue team's running into problems. The main access road is completely blocked by fallen trees. They're trying to find an alternate route, but it could take all night." Michael glanced at the darkening sky, then at the bundle in his arms. The temperature was plummeting rapidly, typical of Alaskan autumn nights. "The cub won't make it that long, Sarah. I'm bringing it in myself." "Michael, that's too dangerous." Sarah's concern crackled through the speaker. "You're at least 4 hours out on foot, and these bears—" "I know the risks," he interrupted, already gathering his essential gear with one hand while cradling the cub with the other. "But I also know what death looks like in the wild. This little one's got maybe hours left without intervention." There was a long pause before Sarah responded, her voice tight with worry but professional. "Okay, listen carefully. Keep the cub warm but not overheated. If it shows any signs of aggression, any at all, you need to back off immediately. I'll have everything ready here. Just be careful, Michael." Securing his camera bag across his back and ensuring the cub was snugly wrapped, Michael began the arduous journey through the burned forest. The familiar weight of his camera equipment provided little comfort as he navigated the treacherous terrain, every step requiring careful consideration. The cub remained eerily still in his arms, occasionally releasing soft whimpers that tore at Michael's heart. He found himself talking quietly, more to calm his own nerves than to soothe the bear. "Hang in there, little fighter. We've got quite a journey ahead of us." As darkness descended, Michael switched on his headlamp, casting a narrow beam through the ash-filled air. The devastation looked even more severe in the artificial light, creating grotesque shadows that danced across the blackened landscape. Every sound, the crack of a falling branch, the whistle of wind through burned-out trees, sent his senses into high alert. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on his shoulders. In 30 years of wildlife photography, he'd witnessed countless harsh realities of nature. He'd photographed predator and prey, documented both life and death, always maintaining professional distance, yet here he was, breaking every rule in the book. But as the cub snuggled closer, seeking warmth in its unconscious state, Michael knew he couldn't have chosen differently. Some moments transcended professional ethics and protocols. Sometimes compassion had to take precedence over convention. As he carefully picked his way through the devastated forest, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change everything. What he didn't know then was just how prophetic that feeling would prove to be. The moon hung low over the scorched forest, its pale light barely penetrating the lingering smoke. Michael's breath came in visible puffs as he carefully navigated the treacherous terrain. 2 hours into his journey, his arms ached from cradling the bear cub, but he dared not stop for more than brief moments to check on his tiny passenger. The cub's breathing had grown more labored, each small whimper sending a spike of worry through Michael's chest. He'd seen enough wildlife in distress to recognize the signs of critical condition. "Just a little longer," he whispered, adjusting his grip to keep the cub secure against his chest. "We're making good time." It was a lie, and he knew it. The fire had transformed familiar landmarks into an alien landscape, forcing him to take lengthy detours around still smoldering areas and fallen trees. His headlamp caught the glint of eyes in the darkness, other creatures displaced by the fire, watching his progress through the ruins of their habitat. His satellite phone crackled again, Sarah's voice cutting through the eerie silence. "Michael, what's your status? The rescue teams finally found an alternate route, but they're still hours out." "I'm about halfway there," he responded, carefully stepping over a charred log. "The cub's hanging on, but barely. How's the setup coming?" "Everything's ready. I've prepared the intensive care unit and called in Dr. Thompson. He's the best we have with bear cubs." There was a pause before she added, "Michael, there's something else you should know. Fish and Wildlife got wind of this. They're not happy about civilian intervention." Michael suppressed a groan. Of course they weren't. He'd spent enough time around wildlife officials to know their stance on human intervention in nature. "We'll deal with that later. Right now, this little one's all that matters." As if in response to his words, the cub stirred in his arms, letting out a weak cry that echoed through the burned forest. The sound sent a chill down Michael's spine, not from fear but from a deep-seated worry. In all his years documenting wildlife, he'd learned to read the voices of animals. This wasn't just a cry of pain, it was one of fading strength. Picking up his pace, Michael pushed through the exhaustion that weighted his limbs. The terrain grew more challenging as he approached a steep incline, loose ash making each step treacherous. His headlamp caught movement ahead, a flash of grey darting between the blackened trees. Wolves! The fire must have driven them down from their usual hunting grounds. Michael's grip tightened on the cub as he slowly reached for the bear spray. On his belt, in the darkness, he could make out at least 3 sets of eyes, tracking his movement. "Not tonight," he muttered, thumb resting on the spray's trigger. The wolves kept their distance, perhaps confused by this strange human carrying what should have been easy prey. After what felt like an eternity, they melted back into the shadows, their departure marked only by the soft crunch of ash under paw. The encounter left Michael shaken, but more determined. Nature was making its position clear. The cub's survival wasn't guaranteed, intervention or not. Yet something deeper than professional interest or even basic compassion drove him forward. In the cub's desperate situation, he recognized a fundamental truth about wilderness and humanity's place within it. His phone crackled again, but this time the static overwhelmed Sarah's voice. The battery indicator blinked red, a warning he couldn't ignore. Soon he'd be truly alone out here, guided only by his knowledge of the terrain and the weight of responsibility in his arms. The cub shivered against him, its tiny body seeking warmth even in unconsciousness. Michael unzipped his remaining jacket, tucking the bundle closer to his chest. The cold bit through his layers, but he barely noticed. Every step forward was a small victory, every labored breath from the cub a reason to continue. Visible puffs. As he carefully navigated the treacherous terrain, 2 hours into his journey, his arms ached from cradling the bear cub, but he dared not stop for more than brief moments to check on his tiny passenger. The cub's breathing had grown more labored, each small whimper sending a spike of worry through Michael's chest. Ahead, through the skeletal remains of the forest, the first hints of dawn began to lighten the horizon. They'd made it through the night, but the most challenging part of their journey still lay ahead. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the smoke-filled sky as Michael caught sight of the Wildlife Center's perimeter fence. His legs trembled with exhaustion, muscles screaming from the hours of careful navigation through the treacherous terrain. The bear cub in his arms had grown disturbingly still over the last hour, its breathing shallow and irregular. Through bleary eyes, He spotted Sarah Chen's figure rushing toward the gate, followed by a team pushing a mobile medical cart. Her usual composed demeanor cracked at the sight of Michael's condition, clothes covered in ash, face streaked with soot, and arms locked in an unwavering grip around his precious cargo. "Get him inside now!" Sarah's professional tone cut through the morning air. Dr. Thompson's prepped and waiting. She reached for the bundle in Michael's arms, but he found himself hesitating, his muscles refusing to release their protective hold. "Michael," she said softly, placing a gentle hand on his arm, "you've done your part. Let us do ours." Finally relinquishing his grip, Michael watched as the team carefully transferred the cub onto the cart. Under the harsh morning light, the young bear looked even more vulnerable. Its singed fur matted with ash, ribs clearly visible through its skin. Dr. Thompson, a tall man with silver-streaked hair and steady hands, immediately began his assessment. Severe dehydration, possible smoke inhalation, burns on the left flank. The veteran veterinarian rattled off observations as they rushed toward the medical building. Core temperatures dangerously low. "Sarah, we need to start warming measures immediately. And get that IV ready. We're fighting shock here." Michael followed them into the facility, his photographer's instinct automatically noting details. Despite his exhaustion, the intensive care unit was state-of-the-art, a testament to Sarah's dedication to wildlife rehabilitation. The air hummed with medical equipment and urgent voices as the team worked to stabilize their tiny patient. "Michael." Sarah's voice drew his attention away from the flurry of activity. "You need medical attention too. You're showing signs of exposure." She gestured to a young assistant who stood ready with a shock blanket and first aid kit. He waved them off, eyes fixed on the medical team's efforts. "I'm fine. Just tell me if..." His voice trailed off as the cub's body suddenly went rigid, monitors screaming in alarm. "We're losing him." Dr. Thompson's commanding voice rose above the chaos. "Starting emergency protocols now. Sarah, I need that epinephrine." Time seemed to slow as Michael watched the medical team fight for the cub's life. Every second stretched into eternity, each beep of the monitors marking moments between life and death. He found himself holding his breath, his own exhaustion forgotten in the intensity of the moment. Through the glass partition, he could see Dr. Thompson's focused expression as he worked, decades of experience evident in every precise movement. Sarah moved in perfect sync with him, anticipating needs before they were voiced. The rest of the team orbited around them in a choreographed dance of emergency medicine. Finally, after what felt like hours, but must have been minutes, the monitors settled into a steady rhythm. "Doctor," Thompson stepped back, releasing a long breath. "He's stabilizing," he announced, though his expression remained guarded. "The next 24 hours will be critical." Sarah emerged from the treatment room, pulling off her surgical gloves. Her eyes held a mix of professional concern and personal worry as she approached Michael. "You did something incredible tonight," she said softly. "By all rights, this cub shouldn't have survived that journey. But we're not out of the woods yet." "What are his chances?" Michael's voice was hoarse, the events of the night finally catching up with him. Sarah's expression turned thoughtful. "Honestly, it's too early to say. The burns aren't as severe as we feared, but the dehydration and exposure..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What I can tell you is that without your intervention, he would have had no chance at all. You gave him a fighting chance, Michael. Now we have to wait and see if he's strong enough to take it." As if to emphasize her words, a weak whimper drifted from the treatment room. The cub was fighting, refusing to surrender to the overwhelming odds stacked against it. In that moment, Michael made a silent promise to the tiny survivor. This wouldn't be the end of their story. Dawn had given way to full mourning by the time Michael finally allowed himself to be examined by the center's medical staff. His own injuries were minor: exhaustion, mild exposure, and a few scratches from the journey through the burned forest. but his mind remained fixed on the small figure fighting for life in the intensive care unit. Through the observation window, he watched as Sarah and Dr. Thompson continued their careful monitoring. The cub lay surrounded by medical equipment, its tiny form almost lost among the tubes and monitoring devices. Yet there was something different now. A subtle but noticeable change in its breathing, steadier and stronger than before. "We're calling him Phoenix," Sarah said, appearing beside Michael with 2 steaming cups of coffee. She handed him one, the warmth seeping into his cold, numbed hands. It seemed fitting given the circumstances. Michael nodded, a slight smile tugging at his weathered features. "Phoenix," he repeated softly, "rising from the ashes. It fits." "Fish and wildlife will be here within the hour," Sarah continued, her tone turning serious. "They're sending Agent Lisa Martinez. She's tough but fair. I've worked with her before on difficult cases." Before Michael could respond, Dr. Thompson emerged from the ICU, his experienced face showing cautious optimism. "His vital signs are improving," he reported, accepting the coffee Sarah offered. "The fluid therapy is working, and his body temperature has stabilized. The burns are superficial, painful, but not life-threatening. What concerns me most is his age. He's too young to be without his mother." "What are the implications?" Michael asked, though years of wildlife photography had already taught him the answer. "Cubs this age are completely dependent on their mothers," Dr. Thompson explained. "They're learning crucial survival skills, proper feeding behaviors, and social interactions. Without that guidance—" He left the sentence hanging, its conclusion obvious to all present. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a government vehicle, its Fish and Wildlife Service logo clearly visible. Agent Martinez stepped out, her crisp uniform and professional demeanor a stark contrast to the exhausted group that greeted her. "Dr. Chen," she nodded to Sarah before turning to Michael. "Mr. Harrison, I understand you're responsible for bringing in this bear cub." Michael straightened, meeting her evaluating gaze. "Yes, I found him abandoned in the burn zone about 15 miles north. He wouldn't have survived another night. I'm aware of your reputation with National Geographic, Mr. Harrison," Agent Martinez said, her tone neutral but firm. "You know the protocols regarding wildlife intervention. These regulations exist for good reasons." "With all due respect, Agent Martinez," Sarah interjected, "if Michael hadn't acted, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The cub would be dead." The agent's expression softened slightly as she glanced through the observation window. "I understand the emotional impact of these situations, but we have to consider the bigger picture. A bear cub, raised in captivity, even temporarily, faces significant challenges if released back into the wild." "Then we'll face those challenges," Michael said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of conviction. "Everything I've done in my career has been about documenting wildlife without interference, but sometimes we have to recognize when humanity and nature need to work together." Agent Martinez studied him for a long moment before pulling out her tablet. "I'll need a full report of the circumstances surrounding the rescue. Dr. Thompson, I'll require your medical assessment as well. For now, given the extraordinary circumstances and the involvement of the fire, we'll classify this as an emergency intervention." A collective breath of relief filled the room. It wasn't full approval, but it was enough to ensure Phoenix would receive the care he needed. As if sensing the shift in energy, Phoenix stirred in his medical bed, letting out a small whimper that drew everyone's attention. Dr. Thompson quickly moved to check his vitals, his experienced hands gentle but efficient. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "He's fighting. the veterinarian announced, a note of admiration in his voice. "Harder than any cub I've seen. Whatever you decide about his future, right now he's choosing life." Michael watched through the window as Phoenix's chest rose and fell in a stronger rhythm, each breath a small victory against overwhelming odds. The journey ahead would be challenging, but for now, in this moment, it was enough to know that the little bear had found his will to live. The next few days at the Wildlife Center fell into an exhausting but hopeful rhythm. Despite Sarah's insistence that he go home and rest, Michael found himself unable to leave. He converted a small storage room into a temporary living space, determined to be present for every milestone in Phoenix's recovery. "You're as stubborn as that cub," Sarah remarked one morning, finding Michael asleep in a chair outside the ICU. She handed him a fresh cup of coffee, the rich aroma pulling him fully awake. "But I have to admit, he seems to respond to your presence." It was true. Whenever Michael spoke near Phoenix's enclosure, the cub's ears would twitch, his head turning slightly toward the familiar voice. Dr. Thompson had noticed it too, marking the behavior in his detailed medical logs. "It's not unusual," the veterinarian explained during his morning rounds. "Bears are incredibly intelligent creatures. They form strong associations, especially at this age." He paused, checking Phoenix's latest vital signs. "The challenge will be ensuring those associations don't become dependencies." The warning was clear, but for now, everyone's focus remained on Phoenix's immediate recovery. The burns were healing well, pink skin visible beneath the damaged fur. His appetite had returned with surprising vigor, keeping the medical team busy with carefully prepared formula feeds. "He's already gained 2 pounds, Dr. Thompson announced proudly, reviewing the morning's measurements. "His body temperature has stabilized, and the respiratory issues from the smoke inhalation are clearing. Up, I'd say our little fighter is exceeding expectations." Michael captured these moments with his camera, documenting Phoenix's journey. Not for publication, he'd made that clear to National Geographic when they'd caught wind of the story, but as a personal record of this extraordinary chapter in his life. One particular morning, about a week after the rescue, brought a breakthrough that none of them had expected. Michael was sitting near Phoenix's enclosure, quietly reviewing his photographs when he heard a distinctive shuffling sound. Looking up, he saw Phoenix had managed to stand on wobbly legs for the first time since his arrival. "Sarah," Michael called out softly, not wanting to startle the cub. "Dr. Thompson, come quick." The medical team gathered at the observation window, watching in amazed silence as Phoenix took his first tentative steps. The cub's determination was visible in every movement, his tiny muscles trembling with effort but refusing to give up. "This is remarkable," Dr. Thompson whispered, quickly noting the milestone in his records. "Bears are naturally resilient, but this level of recovery, it's unprecedented for his condition." Phoenix managed 3 steps before his strength gave out, collapsing back onto his bedding. But there was a new light in his eyes, a spark of the wild spirit that had helped him survive the forest fire. Later that afternoon, Agent Martinez returned for her follow-up assessment. Her official demeanor softened as she watched Phoenix attempting to stand again, his persistence unmistakable. "I've reviewed all the documentation," she said, turning to face the group. "Given the extraordinary circumstances and the cub's progress, we're officially classifying this as a supervised rehabilitation case. Dr. Chen, your facility is authorized to proceed with full recovery protocols." The news brought visible relief to the team, but Agent Martinez wasn't finished. "However," she continued, her tone serious, "our end goal must be release back into the wild. Every decision, every interaction needs to work toward that objective." Michael nodded, understanding the implications. The stronger Phoenix grew, the more distance they would need to maintain. It was a bittersweet reality, but one he had always known was coming. As if sensing the weight of the moment, Phoenix leapt. out a small grunt, drawing everyone's attention. He had managed to stand again and was poring curiously at his reflection in the observation window. "Look at that spirit," Sarah said softly, pride evident in her voice. "A week ago, we weren't. Sure he'd survived the night. Now he's already planning his next adventure." Michael smiled, capturing the moment with his camera. In Phoenix's determined efforts, he saw not just the will to survive, but the promise of something more, a testament to the resilience of life itself and the unexpected bonds that could form in its defense. 2 weeks into Phoenix's recovery, the changes were remarkable. The frail cub that Michael had carried through the burning forest was transforming into a bundle of energy and curiosity. His fur was growing back where the burns had healed, and his appetite had become nearly insatiable. "He's eaten 3 portions already today," Sarah reported during the morning briefing, reviewing the feeding logs. "Dr. Thompson says it's normal for his age, but we're going through formula supplies faster than anticipated." Michael watched through the observation window as Phoenix explored his expanded enclosure, now equipped with basic climbing structures and natural elements. The cub's movements were becoming more confident, his natural instincts emerging as he tested his growing strength. "We need to discuss the next phase," Dr. Thompson announced, joining them with his ever-present tablet of medical records. "Phoenix is ready to transition to more solid foods and start learning essential foraging behaviors. This is where it gets complicated." The veterinarian's concerns weren't just about nutrition. As Phoenix grew stronger, the team had noticed his increasing responsiveness to human presence, particularly to Michael's voice. While endearing, it was raising red flags about his future rehabilitation. "Bears are naturally wary of humans," Dr. Thompson explained, his expression serious. "That wariness is crucial for their survival in the wild. If Phoenix becomes too comfortable with human presence, he won't develop the necessary survival instincts," Michael finished, the reality of the situation weighing heavily on him. He'd known this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier. Sarah placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. "We need to start limiting direct human contact. From now on, all interactions should be purely medical or essential care-related." As if to emphasize the challenge ahead, Phoenix perked up at the sound of their voices, moving toward the observation window with familiar curiosity. His dark eyes seemed to seek out Michael specifically, a behavior that both warmed and worried everyone present. "I'll step back," Michael said quietly, his voice firm despite the emotion behind it. "Whatever's best for his eventual release." Agent Martinez, who had been making regular visits to monitor progress, chose that moment to arrive. Her keen eyes took in the scene, Phoenix's attention fixed on the humans, particularly Michael, and the obvious concern on the team's faces. "I've seen this before," she said, her usual professional tone softened by understanding. "The attachment goes both ways. It's natural given the circumstances of his rescue, but now comes the hard part." She pulled out a document from her briefcase. "I've been in contact with wildlife behavioral specialists. They've recommended a graduated protocol for reducing human contact while introducing more natural stimuli. Dr. Chen, your facility has been approved for implementing these measures." The protocol was comprehensive, detailing everything from feeding methods that minimized human interaction to the introduction of recorded bear vocalizations and natural foraging challenges. It was scientifically sound, but emotionally challenging. "There's also this," Agent Martinez continued, retrieving another folder. "We've identified a potential release site. It's a protected area about 200 miles north, well away from human settlements, but with a healthy black bear population. The habitat is similar to where Phoenix was found." The mention of release, though still months away, made the situation feel more real. Michael found himself studying Phoenix through the window, memorizing every detail of the curious cub who had changed his life. The bear was currently attempting to climb one of the new structures, his determination evident in every movement. "Look at him," Sarah said softly, following Michael's gaze. 3 weeks ago, he could barely stand. Now he's trying to climb everything in sight. That's the wild spirit we need to nurture. Dr. Thompson nodded in agreement. The next few months will be crucial. Every decision we make needs to support his natural instincts, even if that means making some difficult choices now. As they discussed the details of the new protocol, Phoenix finally managed to reach the top of the climbing structure. He sat there for a moment, surveying his domain with what almost looked like pride, completely unaware of the bittersweet plans being made for his future. The transition to the new protocols was harder than anyone had anticipated. Phoenix's confusion at the sudden change in routine manifested in ways that tested everyone's resolve. His plaintive calls when he heard familiar voices nearly broke Michael's heart, but he forced himself to maintain distance, watching only through the monitoring cameras installed around the enclosure. "It's like watching your kid go off to school for the first time," Sarah commented one morning, finding Michael in the observation room, reviewing footage of Phoenix's latest attempts at foraging. Except in this case, school is the wilderness, and graduation means never seeing them again. The new feeding system had been implemented, designed to minimize human contact while teaching essential survival skills. Food was now delivered through specialized chutes, often hidden within artificial logs or scattered throughout the enclosure to encourage natural foraging behavior. The formula had been gradually replaced with a diet closer to what Phoenix would encounter in the wild. "He's adapting faster than expected," Dr. Thompson noted during his weekly assessment. "Watch this." He pulled up footage from the previous night, showing Phoenix systematically searching his enclosure, using his developing sense of smell to locate hidden food items. This is exactly the kind of instinctive behavior we want to see. The recordings of bear vocalizations had also begun to show promise. Phoenix would perk up at the sounds of other bears, particularly the calls of adult females. Sometimes he would respond with his own vocalizations, a behavior that Dr. Thompson meticulously documented. "He's developing a natural language," the veterinarian explained. "These aren't just random responses. He's learning to communicate the way a wild bear would." Michael found himself studying these changes through his photographer's lens, though now only through the barrier of distance. Every day brought new developments. Phoenix's growing proficiency at climbing, his increasing strength, the way he would test different materials in his enclosure with natural curiosity. One afternoon, Agent Martinez arrived for her scheduled inspection, accompanied by Dr. James Wilson, a leading expert in bear behavior. They observed Phoenix for several hours, taking detailed notes as the young bear demonstrated his developing skills. "I'm impressed," Dr. Wilson finally announced. "The protocols are working better than I expected. He's showing strong natural instincts despite his early human contact." But it was what they witnessed next that truly validated their efforts. As the afternoon feeding time approached, Phoenix ignored the arrival of staff members who would previously have drawn his attention. Instead, he remained focused on investigating a hollow log where food had been hidden, using his claws and nose to extract the treats inside. "That right there," Dr. Wilson pointed out, "is what we want to see. He's prioritizing natural behaviors over human interaction. It's crucial for his survival." Michael watched the scene with mixed emotions. Pride in Phoenix's progress warred with a personal sense of loss. The curious cub, who had once responded to his voice, was growing into a wild bear, exactly as nature intended. "I know it's difficult," Agent Martinez said quietly, noticing Michael's expression. But this is what success looks like in wildlife rehabilitation. The stronger his wild instincts become, the better his chances of survival. Sarah added her own observation. You haven't failed him by stepping back, Michael. You've given him the greatest gift possible, the chance to be what he was always meant to be. As they watched, Phoenix successfully retrieved his reward from the log, carrying it to a quiet corner of his enclosure. His movements were becoming more confident, more graceful, more wild. The transformation was undeniable, and with it came the bittersweet realization that every step toward his natural instincts was a step away from the human connection that had saved his life. We're on track for the release timeline, Dr. Wilson confirmed, reviewing his notes. If he continues progressing at this rate, he'll be ready by early spring, when natural food sources are becoming plentiful. The words hung in the air, a reminder that their time with Phoenix was limited. But as Michael watched the young bear masterfully tackle his latest foraging challenge, he understood that this was always the true goal. Not to keep Phoenix, but to prepare him for the freedom he deserved. The arrival of winter brought new challenges to Phoenix's rehabilitation. The young bear's natural instincts were beginning to signal that it was time to prepare for hibernation, but the team faced a difficult decision about how to handle this crucial phase of his development. In the wild, he would have spent the summer and fall learning from his mother how to prepare for winter, Dr. Thompson explained during an emergency team meeting. She would have taught him about finding the right den location, building up fat, reserves, and all the crucial behaviors associated with hibernation. Sarah pulled up the latest footage of Phoenix on the monitoring screens. The bear had become noticeably more active in recent weeks, his foraging more aggressive and purposeful. His body had filled out considerably, muscle and fat developing beneath his now thick coat. He's showing all the right instincts, she noted, pointing to clips of Phoenix gathering bedding materials and investigating every corner of his enclosure. But we're concerned about whether he's ready for a full hibernation cycle. Michael, who had maintained his distance according to protocol, but still reviewed every piece of footage, noticed something in Phoenix's behavior that others might have missed. Look at his pattern, he said, rewinding one of the clips. He keeps returning to that northern corner. It's the most sheltered spot in the enclosure, protected from the prevailing winds. Dr. Wilson, who had stayed on as a consultant, nodded appreciatively. Good catch. He's not just randomly searching. He's making deliberate choices based on natural instincts. This is exactly what we'd hoped to see. But Agent Martinez raised a critical concern. The release site we've selected has very different terrain from this facility. If he learns hibernation behaviors here, will they transfer to a new environment? The question sparked intense discussion among the team. The traditional rehabilitation protocol hadn't accounted for a bear this young facing his first winter. They were in uncharted territory. What about a compromise? Sarah suggested after lengthy debate. We modify the north corner of the enclosure to better replicate conditions he'd find at the release site. Give him the opportunity to follow his instincts, but in a way that better prepares him for his future home. The proposal led to a flurry of activity. Over the next few days, the team carefully redesigned that section of the enclosure, adding features that matched the geology and vegetation of the planned release area. They brought in the same types of rocks and soil, planted similar vegetation, and created opportunities for den building that would mirror what Phoenix would need to do in the wild. Throughout the modifications, Phoenix watched with keen interest from the opposite end of his enclosure. His behavior shifted subtly. More observation, less direct interaction with his surroundings. It was as if he knew something significant was changing. He's learning, Dr. Wilson commented, reviewing the footage. Not just about hibernation, but about assessing and adapting to changes in his environment. These are crucial skills for survival. The real test came when they finally allowed Phoenix access to the modified area. The team watched through the cameras as he approached the new features, his movements cautious but purposeful. His investigation was methodical, each new element carefully examined and assessed. "Look at how he's testing the stability of those rocks," Michael pointed out, his photographer's eye catching subtle details. "He's not just exploring, he's evaluating potential den sites." Within days, Phoenix had begun the process of preparing a den in precisely the spot the team had hoped he would choose. A small, cave-like structure that perfectly mimicked what he would need to find in the wild. "This is more than just instinct," Dr. Thompson observed. "He's demonstrating complex decision-making skills, the kind that will serve him well when he's released." As they watched Phoenix continue his preparations, Sarah voiced what everyone was thinking. "Every challenge we face with him, every obstacle we overcome, it's all leading to one moment, his return to the wild. And every time he shows us these natural behaviors, it's both a victory and a reminder that he's getting closer to that day." The approaching winter would be Phoenix's first major test, a crucial step in his journey from rescued cub to wild. A bear. His success or failure in this natural challenge would tell them much about his readiness for eventual release. December arrived with a vengeance, bringing howling winds and heavy snow to the wildlife center. Phoenix's den preparation had intensified with the dropping temperatures, his natural instincts driving him to work tirelessly at creating his winter shelter. "His behavior is textbook perfect," Dr. Wilson reported, reviewing the overnight footage. The cameras, equipped with infrared capability, showed Phoenix methodically arranging branches, leaves, and other natural materials inside his chosen den. "He's demonstrating exactly the kind of preparation we'd expect from a wild bear." The team had continued to modify his diet according to natural patterns, gradually increasing portions to help him build the fat reserves he'd need for hibernation. Phoenix's body had responded remarkably, his frame now solid and strong, barely resembling the fragile cub Michael had carried from the burning forest. "His weight gain is right on target," Dr. Thompson confirmed during the morning briefing. "He's added exactly the percentage of body mass we'd hoped to see before hibernation. Whatever else happens, he's physically prepared for winter." But it was what happened next that caught everyone by surprise. As the first major snowstorm of the season approached, the team was monitoring Phoenix through the observation system when they noticed something unexpected in his behavior. "Look at this," Sarah called out, drawing everyone's attention to the main screen. Phoenix had emerged from his den and was methodically gathering extra branches, carefully selecting ones with remaining leaves and needles. But instead of taking them into his den as expected, he was creating what appeared to be a windbreak at the entrance. "I've never seen this level of sophistication in a rehabilitated cub," Dr. Wilson admitted, watching intently. "This is the kind of advanced behavior we typically only observe in bears who've learned directly from their mothers." Michael, who had been documenting Phoenix's progress through the camera feeds, noticed something else. "He's not just placing them randomly," he pointed out. "See how he's weaving them together? He's creating a structure that will hold against the wind, but still allow him access." The storm hit that night with unexpected intensity. Winds howled through the facility, and snow piled up in deep drifts around the enclosure. The team maintained constant monitoring, concern for Phoenix evident in their tired faces as they watched through the cameras. But their worry proved unnecessary. Phoenix's preparations had been remarkably effective. His windbreak held against the storm, protecting the den entrance while allowing him to occasionally emerge to check his surroundings before retreating back to his shelter. "This is extraordinary," Agent Martinez said, having arrived to assess Phoenix's winter adaptation. we're seeing evidence of problem-solving skills that go beyond basic instinct. He's not just following program behavior, he's adapting and innovating. As the storm continued through the night, the team took turns monitoring Phoenix's condition. The infrared cameras showed him sleeping peacefully in his den, his body temperature beginning to lower slightly. The first sign of approaching hibernation. He's starting the process naturally, Dr. Thompson observed, reviewing the biometric data. His heart rate is decreasing, his metabolism is slowing, all the physiological changes we'd expect to see in a wild bear preparing for winter sleep. Sarah, who had been compiling data for their research records, pointed out another significant detail. He hasn't shown any stress responses to the storm. No pacing, no anxiety behaviors. He's completely calm and secure in his preparations. For Michael, watching through the cameras, this moment felt like a culmination of everything they'd worked toward. The frightened, injured cub he'd rescued had grown into a capable young bear, demonstrating skills that would be crucial for his survival in the wild. "This is more than just survival," Dr. Wilson remarked, his voice filled with quiet admiration. "What we're seeing here is a wild bear emerging. Every decision, every action Phoenix takes is moving him further from his dependent beginnings and closer to his true nature." As the storm began to ease, the morning light revealed the effectiveness of Phoenix's preparations. While snow had drifted deeply around his enclosure, his den entrance remained accessible, protected by his carefully constructed windbreak. It was a testament to his growing capabilities and a promising sign for his future in the wild. The winter. Weeks passed quietly as Phoenix settled into his first hibernation. The Wildlife Center's staff had fallen into a routine of regular monitoring, documenting his periods of winter sleep, interrupted by occasional brief periods of activity. A normal pattern for black bears during hibernation. But nature had one. More tests in store for their young charge. It came in the form of another bear, a full-grown male black bear, driven from his territory by the harsh winter conditions and desperate enough to approach human structures in search of food. Sarah discovered the intruder during her early morning checks. "We've got a situation," she announced over the emergency channel. "Adult male bear circling the outer perimeter. He's showing interest in Phoenix's enclosure." The team mobilized, quickly, but with careful consideration. Any direct intervention could disturb Phoenix's hibernation cycle, potentially compromising months of rehabilitation work. Yet they couldn't risk a confrontation between the young bear and this desperate intruder. "Phoenix's enclosure is secure," Dr. Thompson assured as they gathered in the monitoring room. "The fencing is rated for adult bears, but my concern is the stress factor. If this male starts displaying aggressive behavior." They didn't have to wait long to see what would happen. The wild bear, a battle-scarred veteran of many winters, approached the enclosure fence. His powerful frame showed signs of winter weight loss, his movements driven by hunger and desperation. Michael, watching through the cameras, noticed Phoenix's first reaction. The young bear had emerged from his den, alerted by either the scent or sound of the intruder. But what happened next surprised everyone. Instead of showing fear or agitation, Phoenix demonstrated remarkable composure. He stood at the entrance of his den, fully alert but calm, watching the older bear's movements with what appeared to be intense curiosity. "This is fascinating," Dr. Wilson whispered, leaning closer to the monitors. "He's displaying textbook-appropriate behavior for a young bear encountering a dominant male, not challenging, not fleeing, just aware and cautious." The adult bear began pacing the perimeter of the enclosure, occasionally standing to his full height, an impressive display of size and strength. Phoenix remained at his den entrance, maintaining his position but showing no signs of panic. "Look at his body language," Sarah pointed out. He's learning from this encounter. Everything about his posture shows he understands his place in the hierarchy without having been directly taught. Agent Martinez, who had been called to the scene, watched the interaction with growing interest. This could actually be beneficial for his development. He's getting a real-world lesson in bear social dynamics without the physical risk. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The team monitored the situation throughout the morning. The wild bear eventually lost interest, unable to access the enclosure and perhaps sensing that the effort wasn't worth the energy expenditure in his winter-weakened state. But Phoenix's behavior during and after the encounter proved revealing. He's returning to his den, but notice how he's checking his surroundings first, Dr. Wilson observed. He's integrated this new experience into his awareness. This is exactly the kind of adaptive learning he'll need in the wild. Dr. Thompson reviewed Phoenix's vital signs from during the encounter. His stress indicators remained remarkably stable. He was alert and responsive, but not panicked. This is incredibly promising for his eventual release. For Michael, watching through the cameras, the encounter brought both pride and a bittersweet realization. The calm, capable young bear they'd observed was worlds away from the helpless cub he'd carried through the fire. Phoenix was growing up, his wild nature asserting itself more strongly with each passing day. "We should document this incident thoroughly," Agent Martinez suggested. "It's valuable data for future rehabilitation programs. Not many facilities get to observe this kind of natural interaction during the rehabilitation process." As the team compiled their observations, Phoenix had already settled back into his den, resuming his winter rest as if the morning's excitement had never happened. But something had changed. A new confidence in his bearing, a deeper connection to his wild nature. Every challenge he faces, every natural interaction he experiences, prepares him a little more for life in the wild, Sarah reflected, watching him disappear into his den. Even the unexpected ones. The first hints of spring brought subtle changes to the wildlife center. Melting snow revealed patches of earth, and the air carried the promise of warmer days ahead. The team waited anxiously for signs that Phoenix would emerge from his winter rest, knowing that this transition would be crucial for his development. Bears typically emerge from hibernation when temperatures consistently stay above freezing, Dr. Thompson explained during a team briefing. But the timing varies. In the wild, experienced bears read environmental cues we humans might miss. The monitoring cameras had shown increased activity within Phoenix's den over the past few days. His periods of wakefulness were becoming longer, his movements more purposeful. The team maintained their distance, but watched carefully, documenting every sign of his awakening. His vital signs are shifting back to normal active ranges, Sarah reported, reviewing the biometric data. Body temperature rising, heart rate increasing, all following the natural pattern we'd expect to see. When Phoenix finally emerged fully from his den, the transformation was remarkable. The gangly young bear that had entered hibernation had been replaced by a more mature, powerful animal. His winter coat was thick and glossy, and despite the normal weight loss from hibernation, his frame showed impressive muscle development. "He's looking more like a wild bear every day," Agent Martinez observed during her spring assessment visit. "The physical changes are significant, but what interests me more is his behavior." Indeed, Phoenix's demeanor had shifted noticeably. His movements were more deliberate, his awareness of his surroundings more acute. When the team conducted their morning rounds, he no longer showed any interest in human presence, instead focusing intently on exploring his environment and searching for natural food sources. "Watch this," Dr. Wilson called out one morning, directing everyone's attention to the monitors. Phoenix had discovered a fallen log in his enclosure, one the team had strategically placed there. With powerful claws, he began tearing into the wood, seeking the insects that had made their home there during winter. "That's completely instinctive behavior," the expert explained, excitement evident in his voice. "No one taught him to do that. He's demonstrating natural foraging skills that will be essential in the wild." Michael, observing through the cameras, noticed other changes in Phoenix's behavior. The bear spent long periods scanning his surroundings, particularly at dawn and dusk. His responses to sounds and movements beyond his enclosure had become more cautious and calculated, exactly how a wild bear should behave. "He's developing an appropriate wariness," Sarah noted. "It's exactly what we want to see at this stage. Every day, he's showing us more and more that he's ready for the next step." The next step she referred to was the planned transfer to the pre-release enclosure, a much larger space designed to more closely replicate natural conditions. The team had been preparing for this transition throughout the winter, but Phoenix's strong showing after hibernation added new urgency to their plans. "The timing could be perfect," Dr. Thompson mused, reviewing the calendar. "If we move him soon, he'll have time to adapt to the new environment while natural food sources are becoming abundant. It follows the pattern he would experience in the wild." As they discussed the logistics of the transfer, Phoenix continued his methodical exploration of his enclosure. He investigated every corner, every new spring growth, every change that had occurred during his winter rest. His behavior showed no trace of the dependent cub he had once been. "The hibernation period seems to have accelerated his development," Dr. Wilson observed. "It's as if that time of quiet and isolation helped cement his wild instincts." Agent Martinez made notes in her official log, her expression thoughtful. "Based on these observations, I think we need to accelerate our timeline. The sooner we can get him into the pre-release enclosure, the better his chances for a successful transition to full wildlife." The team watched as Phoenix paused in his explorations to test the spring air, his nose working to catch the changing scents of the season. In that moment, he looked every inch a wild bear, ready for the next chapter of his journey back to freedom. The pre-release enclosure stood in a remote corner of the Wildlife Center's property, a sprawling 5-acre space designed to mimic the natural environment Phoenix would soon call home. Dense forest covered most of the area, with a small stream cutting through its heart, a world away from the controlled environment he'd known until now. "Everything's ready," Sarah announced, completing her final inspection of the enclosure. "We've stocked it with native plants, ensuring plenty of natural food sources. The stream is running clear, and the security measures have all been tested." The transfer itself would be the riskiest operation since Phoenix's initial rescue. Dr. Thompson had prepared a mild sedative, just enough to keep Phoenix calm during transport without interfering with his natural behaviors once released into the new space. "The key is minimal handling," he explained during the final briefing. "We want this to feel like a natural transition for him, not a traumatic experience." Michael watched the preparations from the observation room, his camera ready to document. This crucial milestone, though he'd maintained his distance according to protocol, he felt the weight of this moment, perhaps more than anyone else on the team. The morning of the transfer arrived with perfect spring weather. Phoenix seemed to sense something was different, moving with heightened awareness in his original enclosure. When the veterinary team approached with the tranquilizer equipment, he showed appropriate wariness, retreating to a defensive position. "Good," Dr. Wilson murmured, observing the behavior. "He's responding exactly as a wild bear should, cautious but not panicked." The sedation process went smoothly, and soon Phoenix was safely secured for transport. The team worked efficiently, knowing every minute counted. As they drove to the new enclosure, Michael followed in a separate vehicle, his thoughts drifting back to that night in the burning forest. The contrast between then and now was stark, from a dying cub to a powerful young bear on the cusp of true freedom. At the new enclosure, the team positioned Phoenix near the stream, where he would have immediate access to water when he awoke. Dr. Thompson administered the reversal agent, and everyone retreated to the observation blinds, waiting to document his first moments in his new environment. "Look at his initial response," Dr. Wilson whispered as Phoenix began to stir. The bear's first action was to test the air, his nose working to process the multitude of new scents. His movements were cautious but purposeful as he took in his surroundings. The stream caught his attention first. Phoenix approached the water carefully, examining it from different angles before taking a drink. His behavior showed none of the hesitation one might expect from a captive raised animal encountering running water for the first time. "This is remarkable," Agent Martinez noted, watching through binoculars. "He's displaying completely natural, investigative behaviors, no signs of stress or confusion." Over the next few hours, the team observed as Phoenix methodically explored his new territory. He investigated the trees, tested the bark for insects, and even attempted some preliminary climbing, all behaviors crucial for survival in the wild. "He's already identifying potential den sites," Sarah pointed out, noting how Phoenix paid particular attention to certain areas with natural shelter. "His instincts are guiding him perfectly." The most encouraging sign came as dusk approached. Phoenix began establishing what appeared to be a territory patrol route, marking certain trees and creating paths that he would use to navigate his new space efficiently. "This is textbook wild bear behavior," Dr. Wilson explained, his voice filled with quiet excitement. "He's not just exploring, he's claiming and organizing his territory. This is exactly what we'd hoped to see from a bear preparing for life in the wild." As darkness fell, the team prepared to end their first day of observation. Phoenix had settled into a sheltered area near the stream, his posture relaxed but alert, a wild animal in his element. "Tomorrow we'll begin the final phase of rehabilitation," Dr. Thompson announced. "From here on out, our role is purely observational. Phoenix will either sink or swim on his own merits." Looking at the confident young bear in the gathering, dusk, no one doubted which outcome was more likely. The first week in the pre-release enclosure revealed sides of Phoenix that even his experienced caretakers hadn't expected. Through the carefully concealed cameras, the team observed as he discovered and developed skills that would be crucial for his survival in the wild. "You need to see this," Sarah called out early one morning, drawing the team to the observation room. On the monitors, Phoenix was demonstrating hunting abilities that no one had taught him. A family of rabbits had made their way into his enclosure through the underbrush, providing an unexpected test of his predatory instincts. Instead of charging immediately, Phoenix showed remarkable patience. He stayed downwind, using natural cover to mask his approach. His movements were calculated, each step placed with careful precision to minimize sound. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Wilson whispered, watching intently. "These are advanced hunting behaviors. Notice how he's using the terrain to his advantage? That's pure instinct. You can't teach that." Michael, documenting the scene through the observation cameras, noticed subtle details in Phoenix's technique. The bear's muscles were relaxed despite his intense focus, his breathing controlled. Every aspect of his behavior spoke of natural predatory skill. The rabbit family, unaware of the danger, continued foraging in the morning dew. Phoenix waited, showing a patience that surprised everyone. When one rabbit strayed slightly from the group, he made his move with explosive speed. "Perfect execution," Dr. Thompson noted, marking the event in his log. He understood the concept of separating one from the group. That's advanced predatory behavior, exactly what he'll need in the wild. The success of his hunt marked a significant milestone in Phoenix's rehabilitation. It wasn't just about catching prey, it was about demonstrating the complex decision-making and physical capabilities necessary for survival. Later that day, Agent Martinez arrived for her weekly assessment. After reviewing the hunting footage, she made several notations in her official report. "This is more than we could have hoped for," she admitted. "He's not just surviving in this environment, he's thriving." The team continued to observe as Phoenix explored other aspects of his expanded territory. He developed a sophisticated understanding of his environment, creating multiple bedding areas for different weather conditions and establishing clear paths through his territory. "Watch how he uses the stream," Sarah pointed out during the afternoon observation. Phoenix had developed a technique for catching fish, showing remarkable dexterity with his paws. He would sit quietly at the water's edge, his dark eyes tracking movement beneath the surface, before striking with precise timing. "He's building a diverse skill set," Dr. Wilson explained. "In the wild, bears need to be adaptable, able to exploit multiple food sources. Phoenix is showing he can do exactly that." The most encouraging sign came in his response to unexpected challenges. When a thunderstorm rolled through, Phoenix quickly adapted, seeking appropriate shelter and even gathering additional bedding material before the rain hit. "This is critical thinking in action," Dr. Thompson observed. "He's not just reacting to conditions, he's anticipating and preparing for them. That's a sophisticated cognitive process." Michael, who had documented every step of Phoenix's journey, found himself amazed by the transformation. The helpless cub from the burning forest had become a capable predator, demonstrating skills that many born wild bears took years to develop. "It's as if the wild was always in him," Sarah reflected, watching Phoenix patrol his territory in the evening light. "We didn't teach him these things, we just provided the space for his natural instincts to emerge." As dusk approached, Phoenix returned to his favorite resting spot near the stream, his movements showing the confident ease of a predator in his element. He had adapted to his new environment not just adequately, but exceptionally. Based on these observations, Agent Martinez concluded, we might need to consider accelerating our release timeline. He's showing all the signs of being ready for true independence. The team watched as Phoenix settled in for the evening, his dark form barely visible in the gathering darkness. Every day brought new evidence that the wild spirit within him was growing stronger, preparing him for the ultimate test of survival in his true habitat. The decision came sooner than anyone had expected. During the weekly team meeting, Agent Martinez placed a folder on the conference table, her expression both serious and hopeful. Inside were the final approval documents for Phoenix's release into the wild. "All the benchmarks have been met," she explained, spreading out the evaluation sheets. "His hunting success rate is exceptional. He's showing appropriate fear responses to human activity, and his territory management skills are advanced for his age. In short, he's ready." The timing was perfect. Late spring meant abundant food sources and optimal conditions for a young bear establishing new territory. The release site, a protected wilderness area far from human settlements, had been thoroughly evaluated and approved. Sarah studied the proposed location maps with careful attention. "The habitat is ideal," she noted, "similar to his current environment but with more diversity. There's a healthy but not overcrowded bear population, plenty of natural food sources, and minimal human interference." Dr. Thompson reviewed Phoenix's latest medical assessments. Physically, he's in perfect condition. Body weight, muscle development, all his vital signs, everything indicates peak health. From a medical standpoint, there's no reason to delay. Michael, who had remained silent during the initial discussion, finally spoke. "How soon?" His voice carried the weight of someone trying to maintain professional distance while facing a deeply personal milestone. 3 days. Agent Martinez replied. "We want to move quickly while conditions are optimal. The transport team is ready and we have all necessary permits in place." Through the observation monitors, they could see Phoenix in his element, methodically working his way through his territory. His movements showed the confidence of a predator, fully comfortable in his environment. Gone was any trace of the fragile cub rescued from the fire. "Look at him," Dr. Wilson commented, gesturing to the screen. "Every movement, every decision he makes shows us he's ready. Keeping him here longer wouldn't serve any purpose. It might even start to hinder his development." The team spent the next hours finalizing the release protocol. The plan was carefully designed to minimize stress and human contact. Phoenix would be sedated briefly for transport, then released at dawn in a secluded valley that offered immediate access to cover and water. Sarah coordinated with the transport team, reviewing every detail of the journey. "The route's been scouted, and we have contingency plans in place. The release site is a 4-hour drive, but we've arranged for a veterinary stop point halfway, if needed." As the meeting concluded, the team gathered at the observation window. Phoenix had just successfully caught another fish from the stream, demonstrating the skilled technique he'd developed. His confidence was evident in every movement as he carried his prey to a preferred eating spot. "I remember when he could barely stand," Sarah said softly, watching the powerful young bear. "Now look at him, a perfect example of what wildlife rehabilitation should achieve." Dr. Thompson nodded in agreement. "We didn't just save his life that night in the forest. We gave him the chance to become what he was always meant to be, a wild bear, free and independent." The next 3 days would be crucial. The team began preparations immediately, gathering equipment and reviewing procedures. Every aspect of the release needed to be perfect, giving Phoenix the best possible start to his new life. Meanwhile, unaware of the plans being made, Phoenix continued his daily routine. He patrolled his territory, practiced his hunting skills, and showed all the natural behaviors that had earned him this chance at true freedom. As the team dispersed to begin their preparations, Michael lingered at the observation window. Through his camera lens, he captured what would be some of the final images of Phoenix in rehabilitation, a strong, capable predator ready to take his place in the wild. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The sun was setting over the enclosure, casting long shadows through the trees. Phoenix had settled near the stream, alert but relaxed, embodying everything they had hoped he would become. In 3 days, he would face his greatest test. True independence in the wilderness that had always been his rightful home. Dawn broke over the wildlife center with unusual activity. The transport team arrived early, their specialized equipment already checked and double-checked. Every member of the staff moved with purposeful efficiency, aware that today's success depended on perfect execution. "Final medical check is complete," Dr. Thompson announced, reviewing his charts one last time. "All vitals are strong and he's in ideal condition for the transfer." The veterinarian had prepared a carefully calculated dose of sedative, just enough to keep Phoenix calm during transport without compromising his alertness upon release. Sarah supervised the preparation of the transport container, ensuring every detail met specifications. Temperature control is operational, ventilation is optimal, and we've included natural bedding from his territory to minimize stress. Her voice remained professional, but her eyes betrayed the emotion of the moment. Through the observation cameras, they watched Phoenix's morning routine. He moved through his territory with characteristic confidence, unaware that this would be his final day in the enclosure. His hunting skills had become even sharper in recent days, as if nature itself was preparing him for the challenges ahead. Look at how he's checking his surroundings, Dr. Wilson noted, pointing to the monitor. That constant awareness, that connection to his environment, that's what will keep him alive in the wild. Michael set up his cameras at strategic points along the transfer route. This final documentation would be valuable for future rehabilitation programs, showing how a successfully rehabilitated bear should be released. But more than that, it was the final chapter of a story that had begun in fire and would end in freedom. Agent Martinez arrived with the final paperwork, accompanied by 2 wildlife officers who would help coordinate the release. "The site has been secured," she reported. "No human activity within a 5-mile radius, and we've verified recent signs of other bears in the area, but not so close as to cause immediate territorial conflicts." The moment of truth arrived as the veterinary team approached Phoenix's enclosure. Despite their careful attempts at stealth, Phoenix's keen senses alerted him to their presence. His reaction was exactly what they hoped to see: immediate wariness and retreat to a defensive position. "Perfect," Dr. Wilson whispered. "He's showing appropriate caution toward humans. This is exactly the behavior that will serve him well in the wild." The sedation process went smoothly, a testament to months of careful planning. As Phoenix succumbed to the mild tranquilizer, the team moved in with practiced precision. They worked quickly but carefully, transferring him to the transport container while monitoring his vital signs. "Breathing steady, heart rate normal," Dr. Thompson called out, keeping a close watch on Phoenix's condition. "Everything's looking good." The drive to the release site would take 4 hours, following a carefully planned route that avoided populated areas. Sarah rode in the transport vehicle, monitoring Phoenix's condition throughout the journey. The rest of the team followed in separate vehicles, maintaining radio contact and coordinating with wildlife officers along the route. Michael found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The desperate rescue from the burning forest seemed like a lifetime ago, yet he could still feel the weight of that tiny cub in his arms. Now that same bear was a powerful predator, ready to take his place in the wild. "You're thinking about that night, aren't you?" Sarah asked during a brief stop to check on Phoenix. "The night you found him?" Michael nodded, his camera capturing Phoenix's peaceful form in the transport container. "Hard to believe it's the same bear. Back then I was just trying to save his life. I never imagined we'd make it this far." As they approached the release site, the sun climbed higher in the sky, promising perfect conditions for Phoenix's first moments of true freedom. The transport team maintained radio silence, focusing on the delicate final phase of their mission. The chosen valley opened before them, a pristine wilderness that would become Phoenix's new home. Ancient trees stretched toward the sky, their branches offering shelter and hunting opportunities. A clear stream wound through the valley, much like the one in his rehabilitation enclosure. It was, in every way, perfect. The transport container rested in a small clearing, positioned so Phoenix would have immediate access to cover upon release. The team worked silently in the pre-dawn light, every movement carefully choreographed to minimize human presence in these crucial moments. "Reversal agent administered," Dr. Thompson whispered, stepping back from the container. "He should begin waking within 15 minutes. The team retreated to their observation positions, hidden in blinds strategically placed to document Phoenix's first moments of freedom. Michael adjusted his camera settings, ensuring he could capture clear footage in the dim morning light. Through his lens, he could see the container door, ready to be opened remotely once Phoenix was fully alert. The wait seemed eternal, marked only by the gradual brightening of the sky and the soft sounds of the forest awakening. The first sign of Phoenix's recovery came as a subtle movement within the container. Dr. Wilson, monitoring through a specialized scope, provided quiet updates. He's showing normal wake-up behaviors, respiration and movement patterns, all typical for a bear his age. Sarah, from her observation point, checked the wind direction one final time. Everything was perfect. Phoenix would have a clear scent path to the deep forest, with no human odors to confuse or deter him. The stream burbled nearby, providing both sound orientation and an immediate water source. Movement increasing, Dr. Wilson reported. He's fully alert now. At his signal, Agent Martinez activated the remote release mechanism. The container door swung open smoothly, revealing the darkness inside where Phoenix waited. For several long moments, nothing happened. The team held their breath, cameras rolling, as they waited for Phoenix to make his choice. Then, a dark shape appeared at the container's entrance, Phoenix's head, emerging cautiously as he tested the air of his new environment. His behavior in these first moments would tell them everything about his readiness for wildlife. Would he charge out in panic, freeze in confusion? The success of months of rehabilitation hung on these crucial decisions. Phoenix's response exceeded their highest hopes. He emerged with deliberate caution, each step calculated as he tested his surroundings. His head moved in a constant scanning motion, nostrils flaring as he processed the rich tapestry of wild scents. Perfect threat assessment behavior, Dr. Wilson breathed, barely audible. He's reading his environment exactly as a wild bear should. The young bear paused at the stream, not to drink but to gain higher ground for better surveillance of his surroundings. His muscles were tense, ready for instant response to any threat, but his movements remained controlled and purposeful. After seemingly endless moments of assessment, Phoenix finally lowered his head to drink. The action itself was telling. He kept his body angled for quick retreat, took short sips while continuing to scan his surroundings, behavior that spoke of ingrained survival instincts. The rising sun painted the valley in gold as Phoenix began a cautious exploration of his immediate area. He investigated trees, scent-marked several locations, and showed particular interest in a stand of berry bushes. All natural behaviors that had been impossible to fully replicate in rehabilitation. He's already establishing territory markers, Sarah noted quietly into her recorder, showing excellent awareness of landscape features and potential resources. The team had planned to observe until Phoenix moved into deep cover, but he surprised them again. After completing what appeared to be a deliberate survey of the immediate area, he turned toward the forest. There was no hesitation in his movement now. He had read his environment and made his choice. Michael's camera tracked Phoenix's powerful form as he moved with fluid grace through the underbrush. The transformation from dying cub to confident predator was complete. With each step, Phoenix took himself further from his rescuers and closer to his true destiny. Just before disappearing into the forest depths, Phoenix paused. He turned his head back toward the valley, nose testing the air one final time. Then, with decisive movement, he vanished into the shadows of his new home. Silence held the observation, team in its grip, as they watched Phoenix's dark form disappear into the forest. No one moved, as if breaking the stillness might somehow disrupt the perfect execution of the release. Only the gentle sounds of the wilderness filled the air, the stream's constant murmur, the rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. Initial release phase complete, Dr. Thompson finally whispered into his recorder, his professional tone masking the emotion of the moment. Subject showed ideal adaptation behaviors and appropriate environmental assessment. Time is 0647 hours. The team began their own carefully choreographed withdrawal. They would leave behind an array of motion-sensing cameras and monitoring equipment, allowing them to track Phoenix's movements without human presence. Sarah supervised the final equipment check, ensuring each device was properly calibrated and concealed. First 24 hours are crucial, Dr. Wilson reminded them as they packed their observation gear. The data we collect will tell us if he's establishing a proper territory or if he's searching for human contact. Michael remained at his observation point longer than necessary, his camera still focused on the spot where Phoenix had vanished. Into the forest. Through his lens, he'd captured every moment of the release, but it was the final image of Phoenix, strong, confident, wild, that he knew would stay with him forever. "You did good, kid," he whispered, finally lowering his camera. The words were meant for Phoenix, but Sarah, passing nearby, caught them and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We all did," she said softly. "But now comes the hard part, letting him be truly wild." Back at the base camp they'd established at the forest's edge, Agent Martinez coordinated with local wildlife officers who would help monitor the area. "We've established a 5-mile buffer zone," she explained, marking areas on a topographical map. "No hunting, no hiking, minimal human activity for the next month." The monitoring equipment began transmitting data almost immediately. Phoenix was moving with purpose, following the natural contours of the land as he explored his new territory. His pattern suggested he was already mapping key resources, water sources, potential den sites, food-rich areas. "Look at this movement." "A pattern," Dr. Wilson pointed out, studying the digital tracking display. "He's using the terrain exactly as a wild bear should, keeping to cover, following game trails, marking territory as he goes. This isn't random wandering. This is purposeful exploration." Hour by hour, the data painted a picture of a young bear successfully transitioning to true wildlife. Phoenix had found water, showed interest in natural food sources, and was already establishing a territory that overlapped with productive foraging areas. "He's already covered more ground than we expected," Sarah noted, updating their tracking maps, but in a calculated way, always maintaining access to water and shelter. "He's applying everything he learned in rehabilitation." The team maintained their vigil through the day, analyzing each piece of data for signs of potential problems. But Phoenix continued to exceed their expectations, demonstrating all the behaviors they hoped to see from a successfully rehabilitated bear. As evening approached, the monitors showed Phoenix selecting a sheltered area for the night, a natural depression beneath a fallen tree, well hidden and defensible. It was exactly the kind of spot a wild bear would choose. First day summary, Dr. Thompson recorded, reviewing their collected data. Subject has traversed approximately 3 miles of territory, demonstrated appropriate foraging behavior, showed no interest in human-associated areas, and selected a secure rest site. All indicators suggest successful initial adaptation. Agent Martinez prepared her official report, her usually stern expression softened by satisfaction. "Based on these results, we'll maintain the exclusion zone for 30 days, but all signs point to a textbook release." As darkness fell, the team gathered for a final briefing. The monitors showed Phoenix settling into his chosen rest site, his vital signs indicating normal activity patterns for a wild bear. He had successfully completed his first day of freedom. Michael reviewed the footage he'd captured of the release, each frame confirming what they'd all hoped to see, a young bear ready and able to take his place in the wild. The frightened cub from the fire was now a memory, replaced by the reality of a strong, independent predator. The monitoring station buzzed with activity as the first week's data poured in. Phoenix had established a clear territory, larger than expected for a bear his age, yet well chosen for its resources. The motion-sensing cameras captured images of him successfully hunting, foraging, and demonstrating all the behaviors of a wild bear. "His adaptation rate is remarkable," Dr. Wilson observed, analyzing the latest footage. "Look at how he's already developed specific patterns for different times of day." The recordings showed Phoenix utilizing the landscape with impressive efficiency, fishing in the early morning, foraging during cooler hours, and hunting when opportunity presented itself. But nature had one more test in store for the young bear. The monitors picked up movement of another bear entering the edge of Phoenix's territory, a larger male, likely drawn by the same resources that made the area attractive to Phoenix. "This could be problematic," Sarah said, studying the footage. "That male's easily twice Phoenix's size, and this is prime foraging territory." The team watched anxiously as the situation developed, knowing they could not intervene, regardless of the outcome. The cameras captured the moment Phoenix became aware of the intruder. His reaction demonstrated everything they'd hoped to see in a wild bear: immediate alertness, careful assessment, and strategic thinking. Instead of either fleeing in panic or challenging the larger bear directly, Phoenix began a careful repositioning. "Extraordinary," Dr. Thompson muttered, watching Phoenix's calculated movements. "He's using the terrain to maintain awareness of the other bear while staying out of direct confrontation. This is advanced territorial behavior." Over the next several hours, the team observed as Phoenix employed sophisticated avoidance strategies. He adjusted his foraging schedule, utilized alternative food sources, and maintained awareness of the other bear's movements without abandoning his territory entirely. Michael, who hadn't left the monitoring station since the situation began, noticed something in Phoenix's behavior that others might have missed. "He's not just avoiding," he pointed out. "Look at his pattern. He's actually using the other bear's presence to his advantage." The footage confirmed Michael's observation. Phoenix was tracking the older bear's movements, learning from its foraging success, and even utilizing areas the larger bear had already worked over, finding food items the other bear had missed or exposed. "This is beyond our expectations," Dr. Wilson admitted, making rapid notes. "He's demonstrating not just survival instincts, but advanced problem-solving and adaptation. He's turning what could have been a territorial crisis into a learning opportunity." Agent Martinez, who had arrived to assess the situation, watched the footage with growing approval. "This kind of behavior, learning from other bears while maintaining safe distance, it's exactly what we hope to see in successfully rehabilitated animals." The confrontation they'd feared never materialized. Instead, Phoenix demonstrated remarkable skill in sharing the landscape with the larger bear, establishing clear boundaries through scent marking and timing his movements to avoid direct contact. "He's actually carved out a sustainable niche," Sarah observed, mapping Phoenix's adapted territory. "See how he's shifted his primary foraging areas? He's maintaining access to key resources while minimizing potential conflict. This is sophisticated territorial behavior." As days passed, the larger bear gradually moved on, following the seasonal patterns of food availability. Phoenix had not only survived his first major challenge, but had emerged from it with new skills and knowledge. "This encounter has probably taught him more about being a wild bear than anything we could have provided in rehabilitation," Dr. Thompson noted, reviewing the complete data set from the encounter. The cameras captured Phoenix returning to his full territory, but with notable changes in his behavior. He moved with even greater confidence now, incorporating new foraging techniques he'd observed from the older bear. His success rate at fishing had improved, apparently from watching the other bear's technique. "He's not just surviving out here," Michael observed, watching the latest footage. "He's thriving. Every challenge makes him more capable, more wild." The images showed Phoenix successfully catching fish using a technique clearly learned from the older bear, proof that he was continuing to develop and adapt. The team had hoped Phoenix would survive in the wild. Instead, he was showing them how a truly wild bear learns, adapts, and grows stronger with each challenge. The frightened cub from the fire had become not just a survivor, but a student of the wilderness itself. 2 years passed since Phoenix's release, with the monitoring systems providing regular updates on his progress. The young bear had not only survived, but had established himself as a successful resident of the wilderness. The team had gradually scaled back their monitoring, satisfied that Phoenix had truly returned to the wild. Michael, however, never completely stepped away. His work frequently brought him to the forests near Phoenix's territory, where he documented the region's wildlife recovery after the devastating fire. Though he never actively sought out Phoenix, he kept a trained eye for signs of the bear he'd carried from the flames. One crisp autumn morning, while photographing new growth in the burned area, Michael noticed something unusual: fresh bear tracks in the muddy ground near the stream, larger than Phoenix's had been, but following a hauntingly familiar pattern. "You need to see this," he spoke into his satellite phone, sending images to Sarah. "The movement pattern. The territory marking. It's exactly like Phoenix's behavior during rehabilitation." Sarah's response came quickly. "Stay there. Dr. Wilson and I are heading out, and Michael, don't approach, even if you think it's him. 2 years is a long time for a wild bear." Within hours, the small team had assembled. Dr. Wilson studied the tracks intently, comparing them with their documented records of Phoenix's movements. "These are definitely from a mature male bear," he confirmed. "Probably 4 or 5 years old, which matches Phoenix's age now." They followed the signs cautiously, documenting everything. The bear had been methodically working its way through the recovering forest, focusing on areas where new growth attracted prey. The strategy was sophisticated, showing a deep understanding of the ecosystem. "Look at this," Sarah called out softly, pointing to a fallen log. It had been expertly torn apart, but in a distinctive way, starting from the center and working outward, exactly as Phoenix had learned during his rehabilitation. "I've only seen one bear use this technique." As they pressed carefully forward, the signs became more compelling. The territory marking, the foraging patterns, even the choice of travel routes, all bore the hallmark of Phoenix's unique behaviors, but with the confidence and skill of a mature predator. Michael's camera caught every detail, though his thoughts kept returning to that desperate night in the burning forest. Could this really be the same bear? And if it was, what did it mean that he'd returned to the burn zone? A sudden movement ahead froze them in their tracks. Through the new growth, a massive dark form emerged, a male black bear in his prime, muscles rippling beneath a glossy coat. He moved with fluid grace, showing neither fear nor aggression as he surveyed the humans who had entered his territory. "Don't move," Dr. Wilson breathed, though the warning was unnecessary. Everyone stood motionless, barely daring to breathe as the bear studied them. Michael's camera clicked softly, capturing images of the magnificent animal. Through his lens, he caught a detail that made his heart skip, a distinctive pattern in the bear's facial fur, a slight asymmetry that matched their records of Phoenix. The bear's behavior was extraordinary. Instead of either fleeing or showing aggression, he maintained a calculated distance, demonstrating the perfect balance of caution and confidence they had worked so hard to instill during rehabilitation. "It's him," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Look at how he's assessing us. That's Phoenix's signature head tilt when he's processing new information." For several long moments, the tableau held, humans and bear in a moment of mutual recognition. Phoenix, if it was indeed him, showed no sign of his early habituation to humans. He remained alert, aware, maintaining exactly the distance a wild bear should. Then, with deliberate grace, he turned and moved away through the recovering forest. His movement showed neither fear nor hurry, simply a wild animal choosing its own path. The last glimpse they caught was of his powerful form disappearing into the new growth, as confident and free as they'd always hoped he would be. "He's not just survived," Dr. Wilson said quietly, reviewing the encounter data. "He's mastered this environment, and now he's helping it recover, just as it helped him survive." The Wildlife Center buzzed with excitement as the team analyzed the data from their encounter. Photos and videos covered the screens, each showing different aspects of the mature bear they believed to be Phoenix. Agent Martinez had arrived as soon as she heard the news, bringing with her years of documented records for comparison. The biometric markers are a match, she confirmed, comparing Michael's photographs with their original documentation. The facial features, the distinctive marking patterns, even accounting for maturity, this is definitely Phoenix. Dr. Thompson studied the footage of the encounter with professional interest. His physical condition is remarkable. Muscle development, coat quality, overall bearing. He's not just surviving, he's thriving. And more importantly, look at his behavior during the encounter. The videos showed a bear that perfectly balanced wild instincts with intelligent assessment. Phoenix had neither fled in panic nor approached out of familiarity. Instead, he had demonstrated exactly the kind of calculated response they hoped to see in a wild bear. But why return to the burn zone? Sarah wondered aloud, pulling up maps of the area. His established territory was rich in resources. There must be something drawing him back here. Doctor, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Wilson had been quietly analyzing the pattern of Phoenix's movements through the recovering forest. I think I understand, he said, pointing to the map. Look at how he's working through the burned areas. He's not just foraging, he's following the recovery. Michael's latest photographs revealed the truth of this observation. The areas Phoenix had been frequenting showed the most vigorous new growth, attracting a variety of prey animals. He was effectively tracking the forest's regeneration, utilizing the changing ecosystem with remarkable efficiency. It's more than that, Sarah added, examining the data more closely. His presence is actually accelerating the recovery in certain areas. His foraging activities are helping to distribute seeds. His digging is aerating the soil. He's become part of the forest's healing process. The team spent hours documenting every aspect of Phoenix's return. His size and condition suggested he had established himself as a dominant bear in the region. Yet he showed none of the aggressive territorial behavior often seen in dominant males. He's developed his own unique approach, Dr. Wilson observed. Instead of attempting to control a fixed territory, he's adapting his range to follow the forest's recovery. It's an incredibly sophisticated strategy. Agent Martinez had been making notes throughout the discussion. This could change how we approach wildlife rehabilitation, she said thoughtfully. Phoenix isn't just an example of successful release. He's showing us how wildlife can actively participate in ecosystem recovery. As evening approached, the team prepared to set up new monitoring systems in the burn zone. They wanted to document Phoenix's impact on the forest's regeneration, understanding that his story had entered a new and unexpected chapter. Think about it, Sarah said, as they calibrated the equipment. We saved him from a forest fire, rehabilitated him to be wild, and now he's helping to heal the very forest that nearly claimed his life. It's like the circle is complete. Michael reviewed his photographs one more time, each image showing a different facet of the magnificent creature Phoenix had become. The desperate rescue in the burning forest felt like a lifetime ago, yet here was living proof of the impact one act of compassion could have. Dr. Thompson added his medical perspective to the discussion. What we're seeing here goes beyond basic survival. Phoenix has developed a level of environmental adaptation that we rarely see in rehabilitated animals. He's not just existing in this ecosystem, he's actively participating in its evolution. The new monitoring equipment began transmitting data immediately, tracking Phoenix's movements through the recovering forest. Each ping from the sensors told part of a larger story. a story of resilience, adaptation, and the intricate connection between an animal and its environment. "We thought his story was complete when we released him," Sarah reflected, watching the data stream in. "But really, it was just beginning. He's showing us something entirely new about wildlife rehabilitation and forest recovery." As darkness fell over the forest, the team prepared to leave, their equipment quietly documenting Phoenix's nocturnal activities. The bear they had saved had not only survived, he had transcended their wildest expectations, becoming an integral part of the forest's rebirth. Spring arrived with an unexpected revelation. The new monitoring systems had captured something extraordinary. Phoenix wasn't alone. The cameras had recorded him teaching survival techniques to two younger bears, showing them the same efficient foraging methods he had learned during rehabilitation. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Wilson exclaimed, studying the footage. The younger bears, probably 2-year-olds, were clearly learning from Phoenix's example. They mimicked his distinctive log-breaking technique, followed his patterns of territory, assessment, and even adopted his careful approach to human-marked boundaries. Sarah enhanced the video, focusing on the interaction between the bears. "Look at how patient he is with them," she pointed out. "He's not just tolerating their presence, he's actively demonstrating behaviors. This goes against everything we know about solitary male bears." The footage showed Phoenix leading the younger bears through the recovering forest, showing them the most productive foraging areas and teaching them his unique fishing techniques. His behavior was methodical, almost purposeful, as if he was passing on the knowledge that had helped him survive. "He's creating a legacy," Michael observed softly, his camera capturing new images of the remarkable interaction. "Everything he learned, everything we taught him, he's passing it on to the next generation." Agent Martinez arrived with a team of wildlife experts to assess the situation. The implications of Phoenix's behavior could revolutionize their understanding of bear rehabilitation and social learning in supposedly solitary species. "We're seeing the multiplication of success," Dr. Thompson noted, reviewing the data. "These young bears will likely adopt Phoenix's efficient foraging strategies, his careful territory management, his balanced approach to human boundaries. One successful rehabilitation is now becoming 3. The cameras revealed more subtle aspects of the relationship. Phoenix would often pause during foraging, waiting for the younger bears to catch up and observe his technique. When they successfully copied his methods, he would move on to demonstrate something new. "It's like watching an expert teacher," Sarah commented, making detailed notes. "He seems to understand that these skills need to be learned progressively. He's breaking down complex behaviors into manageable steps." The most striking footage came from a rainy evening. The cameras caught Phoenix leading the younger bears to the natural shelter formations he favored, the same type of protected spaces he had learned to identify during his rehabilitation. He demonstrated how to improve these shelters, just as he had done in his pre-release enclosure. "This changes everything," Dr. Wilson said, his voice filled with quiet awe. "We're not just rehabilitating individual animals anymore. We're potentially creating mentors who can pass on successful survival strategies to others." The team spent days documenting every aspect of this unprecedented behavior. They observed how Phoenix's influence was spreading through the recovering forest, not just through his own actions, but through the ripple effect of his teachings. Michael's photographs captured the transformation in the younger bears. Chadriku. By week, their movements became more confident, their foraging more efficient. They were evolving from uncertain adolescents into capable predators under Phoenix's guidance. "He's not just surviving," Sarah reflected, watching the latest footage. "He's ensuring the survival of others. He's become something we never could have imagined, a bridge between our rehabilitation efforts and the wild population." Agent Martinez began drafting new protocols based on their observations. "This could fundamentally change how we approach Wildlife rehabilitation, she explained. If we can identify and nurture individuals with this potential for mentorship, the impact of our work could multiply exponentially. The forest itself seemed to reflect the success of this unexpected development. Areas where Phoenix and his protégés foraged showed accelerated recovery, their activities helping to spread seeds and promote new growth. The bears were becoming active participants in the ecosystem's renewal. As spring deepened, the team watched. Phoenix guided his students through the changing forest. Each day brought new lessons about survival, about adaptation, about the delicate balance between wilderness and civilization. He had become more than just a success story. He was now a teacher, passing on the wisdom that bridged two worlds. 5 years had passed since that desperate night in the burning forest. Michael stood at the observation point, his camera capturing the transformed landscape before him. The scarred earth had given way to vibrant new growth, and at the heart of this renewal was a legacy none of them could have predicted. Through the morning mist, a familiar dark form emerged. Phoenix, now in his prime, moved with the quiet confidence of a creature completely at home in his world. Behind him came not just the 2 bears he had first mentored, but 3 new youngsters, carefully following his lead through the flourishing forest. "It's become a tradition," Sarah whispered, monitoring the group's movements. Their data showed that Phoenix's first students had gone on to establish their own territories, spreading his learned behaviors throughout the region. Now he was teaching a new generation, creating a ripple effect that was changing the entire ecosystem. Dr. Wilson studied the latest population surveys with amazement. The success rate of young bears in this region has increased dramatically, he reported. They're showing the same sophisticated foraging techniques, the same careful territory management, the same balanced approach to human boundaries. Phoenix's influence extends far beyond what we could have imagined. Agent Martinez had brought officials from other wildlife rehabilitation centers, all eager to understand this unprecedented phenomenon. "What we're seeing here isn't just about saving one animal," she explained. "It's about the potential for rehabilitated wildlife to become agents of positive change in their ecosystems." The cameras tracked Phoenix as he led his new apprentices through their morning routine. He showed them how to extract insects from fallen logs, how to fish in the streams, how to read the subtle signs of the forest. Each lesson was delivered with the same patience and precision that had marked his own journey to freedom. "Look at how the forest has recovered," Dr. Thompson noted, comparing photographs from the day of the fire to the present. The areas where Phoenix and his students frequented showed remarkable regeneration. Their activities had helped spread seeds, their digging had aerated the soil, and their careful foraging had promoted healthy growth patterns. Michael reviewed his vast collection of photographs documenting Phoenix's journey, from the tiny, dying cub he'd carried through the flames to the powerful mentor he'd become. Each image told part of a story that had transcended their wildest hopes. "He's created something entirely new," Sarah reflected, watching Phoenix demonstrate his distinctive fishing technique to the young bears. A bridge between rehabilitation and wild success, between human intervention and natural wisdom. He's showing us that compassion doesn't just save lives, it can transform entire communities. As the morning progressed, Phoenix led his students to higher ground, teaching them to use elevation for better territory surveillance. His movements were still strong and sure, but now they carried the weight of experience and responsibility. He had become not just a survivor, but a guardian of future generations. The team gathered one last time at the observation point, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them here. The frightened cub they had saved had grown into something extraordinary, a teacher, a leader, a living symbol of nature's resilience and adaptation. You know, Dr. Wilson said quietly, when we save an animal, we never really know what we're saving. Every life has potential we can't predict, impact we can't measure. Phoenix has shown us that one act of compassion can ripple through time, touching lives we'll never even see. As the sun climbed higher, Phoenix gathered his students and moved deeper into the forest. Before disappearing into the shadows, he paused, turning to look back at the observation point. For a moment, his dark eyes seemed to meet Michael's through the lens, carrying an unspoken message of triumph and gratitude. Then, with the fluid grace that had marked his journey from the beginning, Phoenix vanished into his realm, his legacy living on in the forest he had helped rebuild, and the lives he continued to touch. The story that began in fire had become an endless circle of renewal, hope, and the enduring power of second chances. Up next, you got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.